So, Asha, has Mark Meadows' legal team found a way to keep him out of prison?
It's complicated. I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent and a legal contributor for ABC News.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet. Let's give the context here.
Sounds good. Well, ABC News has some things to say about Mark. Speaking of ABC News, it has something to say about Mark Meadows.
So we'll get to that. I just want to kind of lay the groundwork, which is Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, one of the central players in the whole January 6th conspiracy.
True.
He's right in the center of my self-coup chart, if people are following along.
The name Mark came up many times in the January 6th hearings. We never heard from the guy, but his name was spoken. And Mark this and Mark that.
The star witness, Cassidy Hutchinson, was his aide. And so she was really giving us a window into the role that he played. And then he disappeared. No one has heard hide nor hair from this man, and there was a lot of speculation on whether he was cooperating with special counsel Jack Smith when Smith issued an indictment on January 6th, for January 6th against Trump. He's not in there, really. Notably absent.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's not just that he's not in there. It's that he's literally been written around.
Yeah.
In other words, other people aren't in there, but like we kind of can figure out that they are. Like Rudy Giuliani is there, even though he's not there.
Like as an unindicted co-conspirator.
Yeah. Meadows is like not there. It's almost like you're kind of writing around the guy. Like it's like writing a story, but you don't want to mention the other person in the room because that's a surprise for chapter 14.
Right. Well, the surprise in chapter 14 comes when Fani Willis issued her indictment against these 19 defendants, including Donald Trump and Mark Meadows. And this is where you said that there was some reporting from ABC News.
That's right. And essentially what ABC News said was that, as Henry is greeting me here, okay, Henry needs to lean against me here while I'm talking. But what ABC News said, and this is really kind of the first time we've gotten a window into this, that
Mark Meadows
told Jack Smith's team that there was no standing order to declassify documents, contradicting Kash Patel, who we all understood that he was just very, very truthful during that supposed conversation he had. He also said that to his knowledge, the documents that were sent to Mar-a-Lago had not been declassified. That was pretty big. We don't know exactly what else Meadows has said, but it's apparent, I would say, from the way that Jack Smith wrote the indictment, that he contemplates Mark Meadows being his witness at trial. And so,
in the Mar-a-Lago trial?
No, I would say in the January 6th trial as well.
In the January 6th trial?
Yeah.
But the classified documents information relates to the Mar-a-Lago, so he's giving information on both. Right.
Well, that's usually how it works at the feds. Like you can't half cooperate. So he's being cooperative, and so it raises some very interesting questions. I think a lot of our listeners may be wondering, well, what does this mean? Is he a flipper? Is like what sort of deal does he have? And we don't know for sure. But I can explain sort of what I think some of the options are, or what I think it is. What we do know is that now Trump and his team know what Meadows is going to say because they have the discovery in the federal cases, so they can see these interview reports from FBI agents detailing what Meadows is going to say. And I think that's where these details, let's say, to ABC are coming from those interview notes. or those interview reports. So in terms of what's going on, by the way, I see you're enjoying, is this blueberry bubbly? Am I right?
It's a blackberry bubbly.
Okay, that's discerning taste.
Thank you.
But in any event, so what's up with Meadows? Well, Meadows has pursued like a very sophisticated legal strategy. He has a very good defense attorney who I know. And his strategy with the January 6th committee, if you recall, was I'm going to produce a lot of texts and other documents that are going to be super damaging to Trump, but then I'm not going to testify. In fact, I'm going to negotiate potentially testifying and then like wig out at the last minute, which saved him from prosecution because it just made it more complicated because he kind of half complied with the subpoena. It wasn't like he was blowing him off like Bannon. And so the Justice Department was just like, this is going to be too hard. Like, let's not take this on. And then here, I wouldn't be surprised if you want a prediction, hot take. My prediction is that Meadows has tried to take a sort of careful in-between position here. He perhaps I wouldn't be surprised if his attorney spent a lot of time talking to Jack Smith's team and said, on Team Meadows think that he did not commit a crime. He's a witness. And he's willing to be a witness for you. If you agree with us and put him in the witness bucket, we're going to be a witness for you. And we're going to tell you what we do know. But only if we see eye to eye on this. He doesn't want to be a flipper. He doesn't want to get immunity. He doesn't want anything like that. He wants to just be a witness and be categorized that way. And we think if you understand...
Do you get to do that, though? Like, what if you did commit crimes?
Well...
And prosecutors are just like, well, we're just going to categorize you as a witness. And because otherwise, to acknowledge that you committed a crime would have to make you a cooperator, right? And you plead guilty to something. That's
right.
I guess.
It depends on the crime. So, for example, if if let's just say you, and your son all decided to rob a bank, and hires the fancy lawyer, and he's like, "Look, I'm just a witness. I was not that. I may have had a mask on, but I was just watching Renato and Asha rob the bank. That he would not be able to get away with that. But in this, in a case where there's an intent element, you can get away with it. I'll give you an example. Never said this before publicly, but I don't see any reason why it should be seen. I think you could discern it from public documents. One of the biggest cases that I had tried was the first case against a high frequency trader, a form of first the prosecution of the provision of the Dodd-Frank Act, and his computer programmer guy was going to be a potential witness, and I didn't want to give him immunity, and I just took the position that he was a witness because this is a programmer guy. Could you have charged him? Yes. In fact, the Justice Department later charged a programmer who I represented and got acquitted for doing something similar. Those are bad prosecutors. What I took as a more sophisticated position that some programmer guy has no idea. He's just some programmer guy. You could take the position here that Meadows was trying to fulfill his duties for Trump, but wasn't in on it and wasn't going to try to carry it forward and was very more careful. He was in the background talking to his lawyers at this mega law firm, making sure he was staying, on one side of the line. That is, at least, I appreciate that's a very charitable reading of things from Mark Meadows, but I think Jack Smith, he's savvy, and I think he decided that it's better to have Meadows inside his tent pissing out than outside his tent pissing in, so to speak, and taking a very hardline view against Meadows and trying to charge Meadows and have a trial against Meadows as a defendant was not worth it. It was not worth it. It was much better to have Meadows on Team Smith, effectively, even if it's, he's not going to give him amazing testimony. He might give him just like a bunt single here or there. That testimony is helpful to him, right? We just saw, I think those snippets from ABC are helpful.
That's a big trade-off for Jack Smith to make, because Meadows was Trump's right-hand man. And if you look at the things that he is listed, the overt acts that he's listed as being a part of in Fani Willis's indictment, I mean, he's not just some passive person just trying to do his best, you know? I mean, let's remember that based on Cassidy Hutchinson, I mean, she was really talking about him being intimately involved in this plan to overturn the election, including, by the way, frequent contacts with the so-called War Room. And the War Room was where Rudy Giuliani and Steve Bannon and some of these other unsavory characters were operating. So you know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
I get what you're saying, that, you know, Jack Smith might just be like, I'm going to the top. That's what matters right now. That's the danger to the Republic, and I'll do what I have to do. And I guess that makes sense. But I do think that in doing that, Meadows is really getting a lot.
Yeah. Well, it pays to have a great lawyer and actually listen to him. I mean, look, and that's part of the calculus that Jack Smith is thinking. I mean, unlike the other bozos in the January 6th case, including the unindicted co-conspirators, Meadows had like a serious lawyer, like somebody like I would consider hiring, okay, for myself if I was in those shoes. So, and like we don't know exactly what all the documents and so forth look like, right? And what the testimony would look like, but if I'm right about what has happened here, and this is purely a theory, just so everyone is listening. In other words, it's possible that Jack Smith gave him immunity. That's really the only other possibility that I could see, is that he gave him immunity. But I mean, he could, I suppose, give him some deal where he's going to flip, but I would think he would have written the indictment differently if that was the case. He would have written him into the conspiracy. So I think but I think I'm likely right that he's just a witness. That's my gut on it. And if that's the case, I just think Jack Smith made a decision that like fighting Meadows is a bridge too far. Better to have him in your side, lobbing grenades at Trump. And I think ultimately that's a sort of, you have to make tough choices to be a good trial lawyer, and the prosecutors that try to bite off more than they could chew often fail. And so you have to understand and draw a circle around things. You have a narrower indictment. And, you know, we talked last time about the difference between the Jack Smith indictment and the Fani Willis indictment. I think I said it's like a scalpel versus a sledgehammer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's working with a scalpel. And in my experience, if you've got a really high profile, difficult case, that's the way to do it. And so I respect that. But for Meadows, the irony is, just to get back to the Fani Willis, it segues us here. You know, of course, we should know that didn't do him very much good. Given, you know, with the Fani in the Fani Willis world, in fact, he is indicted there, and she's just indicting everybody, and so he's going to have to deal with it. And whatever deal he made with Jack Smith, or whatever, you know, careful positions he took there, is not, you know, saving him at all from indictment and a likely trial in the Georgia case.
And we're going to talk in the next segment about what he's trying to do in the Georgia case. But if his, you know, defenses to try to get, you know, this out of Fani Willis's crosshairs doesn't work, what's the downside to him cooperating with her too? I mean, if he's already told his story to Jack Smith, then I don't know. I guess why would he go to battle here? I mean, it's literally the same testimony, really.
Yeah. There's two issues, I'd say. There's a few. One, obviously, I do think he cares about not being seen as a toady against Trump. I mean, that the irony is, I think he's going to probably learn, although I'm not an expert on this, but everything I've seen suggests that you're either with Trump or against him, and being half in and half out doesn't work very well. Okay. Mm-hmm. He's going to be seen and painted with the same brush and viewed as a rat by that crowd, the MAGA crowd anyway. But I think he wants to seem kind of like how Pence tried to play it like, I'm not against Trump. I'm not saying he should be prosecuted, but, you know, well, he shouldn't have overthrown
But how is that going to work? Because you just said that Smith is going to use him
He
as
will
a
be,
star
and
witness.
so is Pence, by the way. Pence is testifying against Trump.
Okay, so then that bridge
Yeah, I
is
just
burned.
think he wants to say he was not a flipper or whatever. But the other thing, the other advantage, the other thing that he has from the DC case that's not going to translate well is in the DC case he's describing himself one of the words that's most used by lawyers, like if you did a word cloud at a big law firm. And you're like, what word is used the most? Characterize or characterized is like a high, like would be like one of those, it would be very large in the word count. Very
Big,
favorite,
yeah.
one of the favorite lawyer words. So I'm sure the way that Jack Smith characterized Meadows' conduct makes him sound like he's like a bystander, right? He's like sitting there eating popcorn, watching the bank robbery happen, even though he was probably in the bank, right? And Fani Willis, the way that he'd flip for Fani Willis, he's going to have to say she's not going to take that sort of that kind of charitable, careful approach. I think she's just gonna be like, "You're in it. We've indicted you. If you want a cooperation deal, you better say you're a criminal along with this guy, and you had a criminal scheme." And I think the irony is it like contrasts what he's trying to do in the Jack Smith case. I think it's very interesting, and that's why I think he's going to end up trying to fight the Fani Willis case, knowing that it's way further down the pike. And maybe he'll change his tune later on down the line, but for right now, I think that's where he's going.
Yeah, because in that case, the ship has sailed. Like she's already named him as a defendant, so there's no way. Like she's not going to write around him. I mean, she did. So his only option is to be willing to plead and flip. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fancy DC lawyer clearly didn't get very far in negotiations with Fani Willis. It's just like, yeah, okay, see you in court, right? I mean, that's where that went. Is just the lawyer probably tried to come up with some do the same two-step that he did with Smith, and that didn't work with Fani Willis, which is interesting. We'll see which approach ends up paying off in the end for those prosecutors.
We will see. Okay, so Renato, I wrote in my Substack last week. The articles and reporting about definitely Meadows, and I think there might be some others that are trying to get their cases removed from state to federal court, had surfaced. And I had talked about how I took federal courts with a professor who shall remain unnamed, who is completely incomprehensible. And for an entire semester, every class consisted of her drawing buckets on the chalkboard, lots of buckets, and lots of arrows going from one bucket to another. And I had no idea what was going on.
Well, at least you showed up to federal courts. Mine was the last semester of my third year, so I'm not
Same here. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know. My attendance record was very, very pristine. So yeah, so we're in the same boat, but it's not. This is not rocket. This question is not rocket science, right?
Yeah.
And I guess we could at least explain maybe better than that unnamed professor what's happening here, which is. Mark Meadows really, first of all, does not want to be in state court. Okay. Facing a state prosecution. He'd much rather be in federal court where he's probably going to get treated better. And he didn't want to be prosecuted at all.
The jury pools are different.
Yes, that's
the jury pools are different.
Okay. By the way, you sound like a trial lawyer right there, Asha. That's exactly the first observation. Yes, that was good. That's exactly right.
Thank you.
That's a big deal.
I did learn something in law school.
Yeah, no, it's a big deal. In fact, that I wasn't top of my mind, but yes, that should have been, because that's exactly right. You're going to get in a Fulton County jury pool. You're getting Fulton County, which I'm just going to take a wild guess was not Donald Trump's best county in Georgia. You're in the northern district of Georgia is like the entire northern half of the state. You're going to get a lot of white suburbanites and probably even some rural folks who are going to be more favorable to Mark Meadows. I mean, that's the bottom line there. But also, he doesn't want to be prosecuted at all, right? He's trying to find a way out of this.
Yeah.
And so he filed a motion along those lines.
Yeah. And just to go back to law school and our first year of civil procedure, I think you had Harold Code too, didn't you?
I had Owen Fisk, so I did not learn much about civil procedure, but it was a fantastic course. Life-changing course, but it didn't learn anything about procedure. Yeah.
I actually learned some civil procedure. Yeah, and I mean, and in the mantra that we always had to say in civil procedure was federal courts are courts of limited subject matter jurisdiction. And so in removing a case from state to federal court, there has to be a reason for it to be in federal court. And limited subject matter jurisdiction means that there are only certain kinds of cases that a federal court has the power to hear. So in order for Mark Meadows to remove his case from state to federal court, he has to make the case that his case, or what he's being prosecuted for, falls within the power of a federal court to hear. And his argument is that he was engaged in activity that he was doing on behalf of the president, calling these officials in Georgia. And under removal, a federal official who is subject, who was being prosecuted in state court, in order to remove to federal court, that he has to meet two criteria. So he has to have been engaged in conduct authorized by federal law or the Constitution, and he must have done no more than what was necessary and proper to effectuate his federal duty. So basically what Mark Meadows is saying, that he was engaged in basically conduct that was authorized by federal law or the Constitution, and that is the conduct that he's being prosecuted for, and that belongs in federal court. Is that a good summary of his defense, basically what he's saying?
Yeah, I mean, his view is, if you're in Team Meadows, okay, I'm not saying this is my view, I'm saying this is the Team Meadows view. If you're in Team Meadows, your view is that, hey, my guy's just he works for the president and he's there to give him advice and stuff. That's all he's doing. He's going to meetings, they're discussing options, they're discussing plans. He never suggested we should try to overturn the election. He's not there storming the Capitol. He thought that was a really bad idea, but he's not like a cop. He's just there. He's not there to arrest the president. He's there to give him his honest opinions, which he gave. And he can't be indicted for that. Acting in his official role is not a crime. I understand that's not necessarily the reality view, but I'm just telling you that's the Team Meadows argument.
Yeah, and Fani Willis is going to say au contraire, mon frère. Right? That, that you were engaged, first that what he was doing was political activity that was outside the scope of anything that was authorized by federal law. I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution that, and I think more importantly, to the extent, because I think what he's pointing at is some language in the indictment where Fani Willis says that he was acting on behalf of the president. But even if that's the case, there's nothing in the Constitution that gives the president any authority to intervene in state elections. So even Meadows acting as his agent is not, operating under any kind of, federal legal authorization or constitutional legal authorization.
Yeah, I mean, you can always, people in criminal cases act on behalf of others all the time. And I think the probably to me, one of the better facts for Fani Willis, since it's Georgia specific and core to her indictment, is the call with the Georgia Secretary of State, Raffensperger, right? Where Mark Meadows is there. He's there for the call. He's in there with Trump. And I think her argument would be that he's lending weight against, to trying to lean on Georgia officials. He's like, hey, this isn't just Trump acting on his own politically. Here is his government official the number one guy in the government side, they're with him, suggesting that this is the federal government pressuring you. It's not just Trump politically, right? So it's almost like, from her perspective, he's abusing his office to try to lend some official credence to what is, as you point out, Asha, a political act, and obviously Fani Willis is charged as a criminal act.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, I don't know if this will actually play a role in the hearing for that, but there are some parallels to some of the claims of executive privilege that Trump tried to make in this context, and that were smacked down by federal judges who basically said this was outside the scope of any kind of duties that you had as, a holder of the office of the president. This was political activity. This was about your campaign.
Yeah.
This was about your election. Like, that's not the office of the presidency or your Article 2 duties or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, I think that even if, let's say we injected some truth serum into the veins of the Meadows legal team, I don't think that they would say that this is like some sort of slam dunk argument. I think they have an argument that's not silly. There's something to it. It's a legitimate argument to make. They're going to get their evidentiary hearing. They're going to bill a bunch of hours defending Meadows. And maybe they'll get lucky. Maybe the judge is going to see it that way. It's not an entirely impossible, which would be a huge win. And then they can, then Meadows can buy him a bottle of champagne. And if they fail, then they've just delayed things by a few weeks or whatever they're doing, a couple of weeks. And they're fine with that too. That's like worth something to them as well, because they want to push this further behind the DC case. They want to get through all of that, kind of have Smith take whatever positions, have Meadows sort of, testify, and then figure out what to do with Georgia. For all I'm sure from Meadows' perspective, having the Georgia trial as late as possible is great, because who knows if Trump's going to be around, if Trump's already in prison by that point. Like, it may be that everyone's energy level changes in a few years.
And I'll just say a couple of things about, the whole removal argument not being silly, even though it sounds like it's going to be, a uphill battle for him to make. But I think we once again, like with the executive privilege arguments, like when you're using the levers of the government itself in order to personally enrich yourself, benefit yourself, engage in personal actions, you're blurring those lines, and it makes some of these legal arguments really complicated. And I think, kind of gets back to how much we rely on norms rather than very, very strict rules. And we're really relying on courts to parse that line that, we hope and expect our officials to actually just observe on their own. And then the other thing that I'll say, and I remarked this to you before, which is not a part of the legal argument, but I'm just observing that the argument that Meadows was acting on behalf of, Trump and that this was, authorized under the Constitution or federal law to intervene in the state election is really completely at odds with the entire philosophy that John Eastman was trying to advocate in his blueprint to overthrow the election, which is that elections are only within the purview of state legislatures and nobody has any other role in them. And that's why they could come up with this other slate of electors, and Pence could, decide to use those instead. It's just an interesting, if you're actually trying to create some internal coherence, it's shockingly not there.
Yeah, I will say that I think the Trump era has betrayed in many ways the fundamental lack of consistency on the part of some conservative legal folks. In other words, when you and I were in law school, I used to get I have a lot of friends who are, I would say, on the right wing side of things and conservative side of things, who would give me their lectures and lessons about their views of the law. And at least there was some sort of consistency in their arguments. But I learned later when Trump came around, no, it's all just about they're willing to say all the stuff that Trump wants, and it's often just, whatever's convenient for him at the moment.
Well, I mean, and the executive privilege argument is one of those things, right? I mean, they're all about the unitary executive, but apparently, when Trump leaves office, like the Peanuts character Pigpen, he gets a little cloud of executive privilege that follows him around, and not so unitary anymore, I guess,
no kidding.
right?
No kidding. 100%.
I don't know.
So before we go, you and I were talking a little bit about meditation. Is that something you practice?
So I get on and off the wagon. I've actually been pretty good about it the last several weeks. So I use an app called Headspace, and it has a lot of different guided meditations and courses and things like that. But I've found it to be really useful, and when I'm consistent with it, it does actually improve my day-to-day peace of mind.
That's interesting. I never considered or knew anything about meditation or mindfulness, but I had several years ago, I had cancer, and I had gotten very sick at the time, and my doctor had recommended mindfulness and meditation, and so I started getting into it. I, like you, I'm not like I have not been super religious with it, but I will say that one thing that it really transformed my thinking about things is that I learned and read a bunch about mindfulness at the time, and the power that comes from depriving certain of your senses so that you can focus your mind and not have as much sensory input so that your mind can sort of clear and so on. And I really make a big effort to do that. And so even I try to find opportunities to have mindfulness in my regular life where I will have, certain activities I do, whether I'm working out or whether I'm driving or whether I'm getting my hair cut or something, where I'm constantly I'm trying to I'm closing my eyes and having no sensory input. And I'm trying to focus and sort of clear my mind, because I have the sort of mind and I don't know if I imagine everyone's different, but for me, I tend to think about several different things at the same time, and everything is always going and it's very frantic. And having an opportunity to slow that down is really helpful and important for me.
Yeah. So I think they call it monkey mind, right?
Is that really? That's super interesting.
Yeah, that's a term. I mean, for me, I think that's really interesting that you feel like you're cutting out sensory input, because for me, I feel like when I meditate, I really try to tune into the weight of my body and the sounds around me and, the touch and kind of just come back into my body so that I'm not floating off into my various rabbit holes that I'm going down. Yeah. And so for me, it's really been about the practice of creating a little bit more separation between me and my thought patterns, so that when I'm start getting really caught up in something, and sometimes it's just really dumb stuff, right? It's the imaginary argument I'm having with my boss, or I don't know, just stuff that when I meditate, later in the day, if I'm driving and I'm doing that, I'm kind of often getting myself all worked up because I'm having this imaginary conversation, I'll be able to recognize, okay, come back, feel your hands on the steering wheel, look at the trees outside, feel the air conditioner, and it helps me to not get caught up. And, I think create a little bit more separation between all of the things that are going on in my head and what is actually reality right in front of my face. If that makes sense.
Yeah. That's interesting. I do think it helps give you perspective. I think one of the things that has come with age for me is having more perspective about what really matters and what doesn't. And I spend a lot less time worrying about a lot of things in life that don't matter. You kind of understand what helps you get where you want to go and what is important to you, and you focus on those things. I think that, but I do think, one thing that I have not done, and I will confess that that's part of the reason why when you mentioned meditation, I thought it was interesting. I've not really done like group stuff meditation. For me, it's like I have an app on my phone, or I will make special times where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to close my eyes and spend the next 20 minutes doing, whatever. But I have not, I'm not done like group, things. And my wife is really into that stuff. And there's actually a thing near in the Chicago area called Soder World, I think, where it's a guy who used to be a pitcher for the White Sox a jillion years ago, is like a hippie, and has got a whole like all gardens and Zen like there's a Zen garden. She took me there this weekend. There's like a Zen garden. There's like all these different places for you to like meditate, and there's a labyrinth and all sorts of different things where you can sort of clear your mind and get in touch with that. And there's various classes and all of that. I don't know if that I'll ever be that person, but I think it's interesting, and I'm sure I'd be interested from some of our listeners what they think and how they practice, mindfulness, and whether or not that helps them in some of dealing with the stresses and all the issues that we have in life.
Yeah, I don't do that either. I mean, for me, it's just like just doing 10 to 20 minutes. I don't know why, like, there's so much resistance. Like, there's always like stuff to do, but yet I will go down like the social media rabbit hole for 20 minutes and waste time there. You know what I mean? But to carve out that time. So to be consistent about that is, something that I have to work at. I will say that for me, what I realized is when I took away all kinds of my rules, or, like for me, it was like, you have to sit in a chair and, sit upright. And I finally was like, I don't like that. Like, so I have this chair behind me, which is comfortable. I sit cross-legged. I lean back. Sometimes I'm holding my coffee. So like, I'm just like, I've let myself figure out what the best way is for me, and not to get too caught up in the quote unquote, the right way to meditate.
I think that's important, is finding a way to work all of this into a routine. I'm big on routine personally. And
something you can look forward to, you know what I mean? That's like what I started doing is like, why am I making this something that I don't like? Like I'm going to do it in a way that feels comfortable and appealing.
I think it's great. And for me, every Saturday morning, I, for example, have different activities I do where it's all an opportunity for me to just think. And I try to exist in that space where I'm not, like I said, I close my eyes and that sort of thing. I think it's really helpful, really important.
Same.
MSW Media.